I will call the meeting back to order. We have one item left on the agenda. Representative Carlson, would you like to move the resolution?
Yeah, Madam Chair, just a second, let me
Yep.
get up to
Sounds good.
where the mic would pick me up in case anybody's recording it. Madam Chair, I'd like to move the budget resolution for 2019.
So,
I move adoption of the budget resolution for 2019.
okay. Chair Carlson moves the adoption of the proposed 2019 budget resolution coded Bud Res 01.
What I'd like to do, Madam Chair, is make a few comments and then walk through the budget resolution. I think everybody has probably sometime today received a copy of the budget resolution. But the budget resolution is balanced this biennium and into the next. It preserves a responsible reserve rainy day fund in the event of an emergency. The work of determining how the funds will be spent will be done in divisions with input of members and the public. But the general distribution of funds represents the values of Minnesota families. This package all works together. The transportation funding package allows for investment in broadband, housing, and services for our most vulnerable members of society and salaries of workers who take care of them, and a $1.2 billion in funding of education overall, that's higher ed and K-12, doesn't happen without changes to our tax system. As we move forward, we welcome the discussion with the administration and the Senate as we move forward. So, Madam Chair, what I'd like to do at this point then is walk through the budget resolution. As soon as I find the right one here. The budget resolution, did I leave one up at the front desk there?
We have staff bringing one over.
I had one that, yeah, here we go. Okay, the budget resolution would provide for agriculture $129,832,000, and that's an increase over base of $7,580,000. The capital investment would be $1,613,479,000. That's $141,702,000 over base. And I should point out on that particular one, that would provide for a $1.5 billion bonding bill. Some of you may remember when the governor came out with his proposal for capital investment, he set it at roughly $1.2 billion, but he said he didn't include any local projects. And so we wanted to give some flexibility in case the Capital Investment Committee chooses to add some local projects. They'll have the funding available to do that. So that's why we have a slightly higher number playing on the governor's suggestion. Education would be $20,452,783,000. That's $900 million above base. Energy and climate would be the $25,538,000 or $2 million above base. Environment and natural resources, $356,787, $32,558,000 above base. Greater Minnesota Economic Development Division would be $106,288,000. That's $100 million above base. and should be enough in there to cover the broadband request and some additional funding. Health and Human Services will be 15 billion, 3,282,000. That's 128,639,000 above base. Higher education would be 3,560,800,000. That's 304,972,000 would be the change from base. And by the way, that would give enough resources to do a tuition freeze for 2 years. The housing is 131,596,000. That's 26 million above base. Jobs and Economic Development is 333,820, which is 83,785,000 above base. Judiciary is 1,047,650,000. What is? We're getting some feedback somewhere. And that's, I'll repeat that, that's 1,047,657,000, which is 91,445,000 above base. Public Safety, 1,525,000 and 98, and it's 121,418,000 above base. State government would be 987,380, or 987,386,000, 102,526 above base. The tax, which is a net of tax increases and tax spending, would be a minus 1,219,796,000, or 1,219,796,000. Transportation would be minus 177,813,000. That's you'll see a minus number there as well if you're looking at the spreadsheet of minus 425,268,000. And the change there is we're putting transportation essentially under the, we're moving that money back into the general fund. And that's one of the things that will allow us with the changes in transportation funding to do some of the things that we were talking about, especially in education. Let's see, Veterans and Military Affairs, 209,221,000, an increase of 4,335,000. And then we have the other bills category of 15,000. That would be in case we have any miscellaneous bills that would come through later in the session. And if I recall, I think that was the same number that the previous majority used for other bills as well. So with that, Madam Chair, that concludes the spreadsheet. And I would like to point out that, as I mentioned earlier, we feel that this represents the values of Minnesota families with the priorities I outlined with my initial comments. So, Madam Chair, I'll take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And there are no amendments at this point, and being that this is a function, the budget resolution is a function of Ways and Means, even though we don't normally take testimony in this, is there anyone in the audience who would like to offer brief comments on this resolution before we go to questions? Okay, seeing none, then we'll take member questions at this point. And Representative Davids.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Chair Carlson. When I first was reading through the numbers here, of course, my eyes immediately go to taxes. That's where they go. And I was a bit surprised by that number. And I got to thinking about, I mean, I've got a tremendous amount of confidence in Chair Marquardt, but the chairman of the tax committee is going to have quite a time with this, and I'm not sure how he does this. He's going to have to raise taxes a lot And the 4 areas they'll most likely come from are, I've got the suits index here. In the tax speak, that means if it's progressive, it has a positive number. If it's regressive, it has a negative number. And I haven't seen the tax bill yet, but I can kind of figure out where it's going. And to get the numbers that we're going to need to get here, that the chair is going to have to get in taxes, he's going to have to raise the corporate franchise tax, which is a negative in the suits index, so it's regressive. Motor fuels excise tax, Chair Carlson talked about that a little bit, cigarette and tobacco tax, and the sick tax. And so all of these are regressive taxes that's going to really put a burden on the poorest of the poor. And I don't know how Chair Marquardt gets around that. And so I think this budget puts the tax chair in quite an untenable situation. But we will see what kind of tax chairs can work magic. They have in the past, and so I'm looking forward to seeing some from our very capable chairman at this point.
Representative Marquardt.
So, well, thank you very much, and thank you, Chair Davids, for those comments. And, you know, if you look at just the spreadsheet we have in front of you, that $1.2 billion pretty much equals what's going into education, which is $1.2 billion. And we do have a budget deficit into the future, which means if you want to raise even one dime of new spending in education, whatever this biennium, you have to somehow raise some money for the next biennium. You just can't do that. And you know, one thing the tax bill is going to talk about is it's about the future. You know, are we going to just look at the status quo, or which really there isn't the status quo. You're either moving forward or backwards. And I want to move the state forward, and this budget moves the state forward. What the tax bill will do is allow for these important resources that will go to very important investments in education and healthcare and public safety, all those things that not only will improve the quality of life for folks, but move our state forward economically. And I think we can talk about maybe some corporate things later. I'm not going to give any details right now. But, you know, this bill will be quite aggressive when it comes to fairness. It's going to be quite aggressive when it comes to leveling the playing field. And it's really going to look at protecting our senior citizens and our working families and our farmers, who the report just came out from the University of Minnesota Extension today, that since they've been keeping stats for 23 years, the University of Minnesota Extension, the lowest farm income since those 23 years. And a lot of people are saying this might be the lowest farm income since 1980s. And the farm income's gone down 6 years in a row now. So we've got to level the playing field. And just one point I'll make is that the overall revenue that is in this spreadsheet is an increase of about 4%. It's about 4% increased revenue over the base. And what's in the tax bill is about 2.8%. But when you take everything, it's about 4%. But over the base. But put another way, it means that 96% of all the revenue that is shown in this bill, 96% of all the revenue was approved by the past majorities. You approved it, you signed off on it, and that's what you pushed in your budget. So the increase is 4%. So 96% you've already voted for. And it's pretty close to the budget. I think this is a 5% total increase, I think, in the budget numbers. And so in the past, the majority has actually supported 95% of the budget. So I know we're going to be talking about this 4%, this 5%, but remember that most of it's already in state law, approved by, I think, most members sitting on the other side of the aisle there. So we'll have a lot of very good discussion on this, but it is about a tax bill that can move the ball forward, because it's going to be able to fund these very important areas that's going to provide for a well-trained workforce. It's going to provide for hopefully healthier communities. It's going to fund property tax cuts around the state. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Torkelson.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for presenting this budget to us tonight. It's very revealing. The transportation number, of course, sticks out like a sore thumb. We know I think we know that it's not your intention to starve transportation, but there's certainly a big shift in revenue resources here. The tax chair talked about the future. The experts I've been listening to over these last 2 years, prior 2 years as chair of the Transportation Committee, they indicate to me that the gas tax is not a good long-term resource for transportation. None of us are talking about cutting the gas tax to zero, but yet to switch our dependence from this very small amount of the general fund and shift our dependence back to virtual total dependence on the gas tax is not a good long-term plan. The gas tax will not hold up over time, and eventually we'll have to make that shift. We made a significant shift in that direction over the last biennium, and this really puts all those shifts in reverse. The details of this plan are not available at this point. I'm not sure how the Transportation Chair plans to get this work done, but all I can go by is what the governor has proposed, and these numbers go well beyond where the governor went. So all I can guess is that you're either going to spend a little less on transportation, or you're going to move even more revenue out of the transportation budget and into that black hole that is a general fund. The message to Minnesotans is that spending less than 1% of the general fund on transportation is spending too much general fund on transportation. We shouldn't do that according to the Democrats. We should move all of that back to the general fund, and we should depend solely on the gas tax, which is, as I said earlier, not a dependable resource. It's pretty painful to look at this as I look at all the work we did in the last biennium to help out small cities, to help out local roads and local bridges within the transportation bill. All of that work has also been deposited in the wastebasket, as far as I can tell, or will be, in order to meet this very challenging number. It's pretty ugly, and the chair, the author of the bill, did mention that body across the street, and I've heard that their attitude towards the gas tax may be quite different than the House majority's attitude toward a gas tax, and how that is resolved, I really have no idea. Perhaps the tax chair can inform me, or I should say the transportation chair can inform me. The tax chair already had his say.
Madam Chair, I didn't see
Jim
that
Carlson.
he yielded, so just a couple of comments. As you well know, when we were debating the funding of transportation before, a lot of us were very concerned about the use of the sales tax on auto parts and other miscellaneous taxes being removed from the general fund, which takes money away from education, it takes money away from health and human services, it takes money away from higher education, and we feel that this is a better way to go, and I think we've been very consistent in terms of our position on that question the last biennium. I would be remiss if I didn't challenge a little bit when you say the black hole of the general fund. I mean, when I went through the list there, the general fund really covers almost all of the basic services that are vitally needed in the state of Minnesota. And I wouldn't refer to it as a black hole. It's the funding that provides opportunity for Minnesotans. whether we're talking about education, whether we're talking about healthcare, whether we're talking about the services that are provided by state government. So I guess we would disagree, Representative Torkelson, on that particular point.
Representative Torkelson?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Perhaps I spent too much time working on MNLARS.
Are there any other member questions? Representative Garofalo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I guess when I take a look at this document, it certainly is interesting. I think it's a good word for it. We'll see how the majority party decides to fill in these numbers, the amount of fees, transfers, and other associated items. But I think, echoing what Representative Torkelson's comments were, I think the biggest concern for me is that I see the DFL using the gas tax that's currently being used for roads, bridges, and potholes. They're taking that money and instead they're diverting it to the general fund for childcare fraud, failed MNLARS systems, and bloated bureaucracy in government. And for the first time since the 1950s, we're actually going to have the gas tax being redirected. We're going to have that first 7 cents of the gas tax be used not for roads, not to invest in our infrastructure, which is critically needed and there's bipartisan support on. And instead, that money is going to be used to backfill a hole being created by a House DFL majority that's choosing to take that money out of roads and bridges. Something where the area where there should be the most bipartisan agreement, the House DFL is going after and attacking. It's irresponsible, it's short-sighted, and it certainly doesn't bode well for the conclusion of the session. Madam Chair and members, we are roughly 8 weeks until the end of session. And as I take a look at this budget resolution, I think an appropriate name for it is the special session budget resolution. I don't know how, using these numbers, you can possibly reach an agreement in the next 56 days. The gaps in the policies here that are, when I understand opening negotiating points, the governor did that for you. Governor staked out a far left claim, gave you the perfect opportunity to move into the middle, to be between the Republican Senate and the governor's office, and instead you tacked to the left. You went beyond the governor, went beyond his tax increases, regressive tax increases, that Representative Davids has mentioned. So these numbers are going to get figured out. Nothing's going to become law this year unless there's bipartisan support. But boy, you guys better buckle. I hope those freshmen are buckled up in their seatbelts and ready to go, because I take a look at the gap that's been created with these numbers, and we're not even mentioning the amount of non-tax revenue that these chairs are going to be empowered to. I don't see any targets here for fee revenue, so we can only assume that these DFL chairs are going to be raising quite a bit of non-tax revenue, transferring every penny from every couch cushion in state government over to the general fund to make the spending amounts look lower. And this is all happening at a time when we have the bond market signaling concerns about a recession. So the exact worst thing we could be doing right now is building uncertainty into our tax code and additional volatility into a potentially troubled economy. And we'll talk about this more as the session goes on. Tonight's not the time for a long conversation, but the way these numbers appear to play out is that you're going to use one-time money from this year's biennium to patch up a structural deficit in the tails. And that's assuming the economy is growing. That's assuming you get your tax increases. This is a recipe for structural deficits, but we'll see how those numbers play out, Madam Chair. I would urge members to vote no on this resolution, and let's work on something that actually both sides of the aisle can support. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Hertaus?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative. I guess one of the things that I've been running into with constituents is they actually believe that this 20 cents on the gas tax is going to be spent on roads and bridges. There's been accusations for the last several years about gimmicks. This truly is a gimmick in terms of using non-tax revenue to raise general fund spending. As it's been pointed out, about 7.5 cents is just going to backfill what's already been authorized and approved. We've also heard concern with regards to how regressive the gas tax is, and the response from the majority is that we have to increase the working family credit to offset those increases, which by some calculations suggests it's another 2.5 cents. So the public is out there thinking that 20 cents is going to be spent for roads and bridges when 10% or 10 cents of it, or half of that tax, is really going into a different direction. Now, in addition to that, let's talk about what's going to happen at the pump, really. So people are going to take their piece of plastic and stick it in the pump, and they're going to get gasoline out of it, and at a higher cost because of the gas tax. And the merchants are going to have to pay merchant fees on this additional money that's getting charged to the credit cards. And to offset that, they're going to raise the price of gasoline at the retail level to cover their costs. So it even becomes more regressive. So there's lots of problems with the targets as they are, and I know in the end, we're going to have bipartisan agreement, as Rep. Garofalo said, but this is an area that is really an obfuscation of what our principles are in terms of balancing a budget and making priorities as to where we should be spending our money. And I've said it before, if everything's a priority, I guess nothing is. But we have a structural way of keeping general fund revenue that would be sustainable with regard to the gasoline and motor fuels, sales tax revenue, and this certainly needs to be reworked. But those are my comments. Thank you.
Are there any other member comments or questions? Okay, seeing none. Representative Carlson? do you
Madam
have-
Chair, just a few concluding comments then. As I mentioned earlier, in my view, this represents the values of Minnesota families with priorities on quality education for our youngest learners, to those returning to college for new skills, a transportation system that meets the needs of Minnesotans wherever they live, more adequately funded through a user-based, constitutionally dedicated revenue stream. And that was, by the way, just one footnote that I didn't mention earlier with that change. When we use the gas tax and the full 20 cents will in effect go into roads and bridges, but that is constitutionally dedicated as opposed to when we were using general fund dollars. So it's a steadier stream of funding. Access to affordable health care with a focus on consumers, making strategic investments that allow all parts of our state to thrive as one Minnesota, a system of taxes that is a counterbalance to the changes made at the federal level that benefited the upper income brackets and is moving us more toward a progressive tax system here in Minnesota. But as I mentioned earlier, the details, whether it's the tax committee or the divisions of this committee, will be handled in the divisions and by the tax committee. So there's more to be done, and I would appreciate support for the budget resolution. And Madam Chair, I renew my motion that we adopt the budget resolution as proposed for the 29 budget. Let me restate it. I move the adoption of the proposed, or renew my motion of the proposed 2019 budget resolution coded BUDRES01.
All right, thank you, Representative Carlson. The Carlson motion is before us, that the proposed budget resolution coded BUDRES01 be adopted. So with this motion before us, all those in favor signified by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. No. The motion prevails and the House budget resolution is adopted.
Madam Chair, I think we're ready to adjourn.
And with that, members, we are adjourned.